The crystal wine glass slipped from my fingers, shattering into 1,000 glints on the walnut table, its crimson contents bleeding into the pristine cloth. A thin line of blood traced my palm, but the sting was a whisper compared to the icy weight crushing my chest. 24 pairs of eyes. Harrington eyes sharp with curiosity and a gleam of satisfaction locked onto me, as if I were a specimen pinned under glass. I am Abigail, 34, an artist whose dreams have always been a punchline to my husband's family. This Thanksgiving dinner 10 miles from the city's pulse was no mere gathering. It was an ambush, and the ochre envelope thrown before me held a truth sharper than any shard on that table. The dining room of the Harrington estate, a 5,000-square-foot monument to legacy, gleamed with excess silver candelabras, porcelain plates, and the faint scent of rosemary from the turkey. I sat beside Lindsay, my best friend who'd insisted on joining me tonight, her presence a tether to sanity. Across the table, Brandon, my husband of 6 years, carved the bird with mechanical precision. His jaw tight, Mildred, his mother, presided at the head, her silver hair coiled like a crown, her gaze slicing through me. Julie, Brandon's sister, swirled her wine, her smirk a blade honed over years of jabs at my little art studio. The air was thick with unspoken judgment, and I felt it coil around me, tightening with every clink of cutlery. "What's this?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the tremble in my hand as I reached for the envelope. The room stilled. Brandon's eyes, once warm, now cold as slate met mine. "Divorce papers," he said, his tone flat as if announcing we'd run out of cranberry sauce. A gasp escaped Lindsay, but the Harringtons remained unmoved. Mildred sipped her wine, setting the glass down with a clink that echoed like a gavel. "We thought it gentler to do this with family present." She said each word, a royal decree, her lips curling as if the word gentler were a gift. Julie's smirk widened, and cousins I'd thought neutral exchanged knowing glances. Gentler for whom I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. "You filed for divorce at Thanksgiving dinner." I repeated each syllable, a stone dropping into the silence. Mildred leaned forward, her icy eyes pinning me. "Sweetheart, everyone here knows you were never a fit for this family." Her voice dripped with condescension, and Julie chimed in. "Oh, come on, everyone knows that studio behind the house is just your excuse to avoid a real job." Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and unrestrained even from those I'd hoped were allies. I searched Brandon's face for a flicker of the man who once carried paint cans to my studio, but he looked away. "A stranger in the house we'd shared. We just want to help you wake up," Mildred added, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "This family needs someone sturdier." Beneath the table, Lindsay's hand found mine, her squeeze a lifeline. My plate, turkey slices, golden rolls, cranberry sauce turned my stomach. Humiliation burned, but something else stirred a spark, long buried. In my purse, tucked away for nearly a year, was a document Brandon had signed. In a drunken haze on our 6th anniversary, the deed to this very house transferred to me. He'd forgotten by morning, but I hadn't. I rose, blood dripping onto the tablecloth, staining its perfection. "You're right," I said, my voice low but steady. "I don't fit with this family. I'm far above your standards." Brandon's head snapped up, his face flushing. "What?" Mildred's composure faltered. "Lindsay, can you take me to the hospital?" I asked, turning to my friend whose eyes widened but nodded. My hands bleeding. "Oh, and Mildred, wash that tablecloth soon. Bloodstains if you leave it, like deed transfers." The clatter of forks rang out. "What deed transfer?" Mildred's voice cracked, her authority slipping. I smiled, cold and small. "Happy Thanksgiving. This may be your last meal in this house." I walked out, ignoring Brandon's calls, Julie's gasps, and the toppled chairs. The amber-lit streets blurred as Lindsay drove, but I didn't look back. The spark in me was now a flame, and I would not let it die. The emergency clinic 3 miles from the Harrington estate smelled of antiseptic and quiet resolve. As the doctor stitched the cut on my palm, 6 neat sutures, I barely flinched. The physical pain was nothing compared to the rupture inside me, a wound years in the making now torn open by that Thanksgiving ambush. And in that sterile room lit by harsh fluorescence, I decided I was done, being the quiet wife of the Harringtons. Lindsay sat beside me, her silence a steady anchor, her eyes asking what I'd do next. I didn't answer, but my mind was already tracing a path forward, one painted in bold, unapologetic strokes. At Lindsay's 800-square-foot apartment in the city, I poured myself water, the glass cool against my bandaged hand. The space was warm, cluttered with books, and her knitting projects a stark contrast to the Harringtons' sterile grandeur. "Abigail, are you sure about this?" Lindsay asked, her voice soft but probing. I opened my phone, pulling up a draft email I'd written months ago to Gloria McDaniel, my attorney, a woman whose sharp mind had unraveled impossible property disputes. Subject property at 118 Willow Creek, I typed. The time has come, and hit send. "I've been silent too long," I said, my voice low but firm. "Now it's their turn to listen." Lindsay nodded, her smile a quiet affirmation. The next morning, Gloria arrived, her briefcase as formidable as her gaze. In Lindsay's cramped living room, she spread out a thick folder, her fingers flipping to a notarized copy of the deed Brandon had signed. "First, we file ownership confirmation at the county office," she said, her tone all business. "Then serve the Harringtons with a 30-day eviction notice." I nodded, unblinking, the weight of the moment settling over me like a mantle. The house, that sprawling 5,000-square-foot cage, was legally mine, and I would wield it not as a trophy but as a canvas for something greater. Gloria's plan was a map, and I was ready to follow it. As Gloria left, I stood by Lindsay's window, watching the city pulse below. The cut on my palm throbbed faintly, a reminder of the night before, but it was no longer a wound. It was a mark of survival. I thought of my studio, that 200-square-foot haven behind the estate, where I'd painted through sleepless nights, dreams, dismissed by those who now faced eviction. The Harringtons thought they'd broken me, but they'd only cracked the shell. Inside, I was whole, and I would build something they could never imagine, a sanctuary for art, for truth, for me. The plan was no longer a whisper in my heart. It was a vow, and I would keep it. The bell's chime echoed through the night, a bold declaration slicing the silence of the Harrington estate. I stood at the threshold of the 3-acre property, my long coat swaying in the November chill, papers clutched in my bandaged hand. No longer the diminished wife, I was the owner, and the weight of that truth steadied my pulse. The grand doors, once a barrier to my belonging, now parted at my command. Inside, the family awaited, unaware that the ground beneath them had shifted. The amber glow of their chandeliers would soon illuminate their reckoning, and I was ready to claim what was mine. Brandon answered, his face paling as he saw me, my hair neatly tied back, my gaze unyielding. "Abigail, about yesterday," he began. But I cut him off, stepping into the 600-square-foot living room. The air held traces of wood polish and expensive perfume, a facade of control. Mildred sat on a velvet sofa, her posture rigid. Julie perched nearby, her wineglass frozen mid-sip. Cousins and aunts hovered, their whispers dying as I placed a legal notice on the glass coffee table. "You have 30 days to vacate," I said, locking eyes with Mildred. "This house has been mine since last year, per the deed." Brandon signed. Mildred's lips parted, her composure fracturing. "This is outrageous," she hissed, but her voice wavered. Julie exhaled sharply, and Brandon stood mute. His hands clenched. I let the silence stretch, savoring their disbelief. "If you thought you could erase me from my own life and keep this house, you miscalculated," I said, my words, deliberate, each one a stone sealing their fate. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Read the notice carefully. It's binding." The room behind me erupted in murmurs, but I stepped into the night. The crunch of gravel under my boots, a rhythm of triumph. The estate loomed dark, its windows reflecting my headlights. As I drove away, my heart a mix of victory and the ache of memories I'd soon reshape. Later, in the solitude of my 200-square-foot studio behind the house, I unrolled a sketch pad. The space smelled of linseed oil and possibility, its walls still bearing the colors Brandon once helped me choose. But those days were gone. I sketched a vision, the grand hall as a gallery, sunlight streaming through a skylight, rooms for restoration and classes, the haven. I named it a refuge for art, dismissed by those too blind to see its worth. My pencil moved with purpose, each line a promise to transform this cage into a sanctuary. The Harringtons' eviction was just the beginning. This house would become my legacy, not theirs. The studio of Professor Bennett, 50 miles outside Boston, was a sanctuary of exposed brick and slanting sunlight, the scent of turpentine mingling with hope. I spread my Haven designs across his worn table, the sketches transforming the Harrington estate into a beacon for forgotten art. Bennett, his deep voice softened by years of restoring lost masterpieces, studied the plans, his eyes sparking with approval. A bold vision, he said, removing his goggles. You're not just rebuilding a house, you're rewriting its soul. His words ignited a fire in me, and I knew this was the moment. The Haven would begin to rise from the ashes of my past. Back at the estate, the transformation began with a symphony of hammers and dust. The 12-foot-high walls shed their outdated wallpaper, revealing raw plaster ready for rebirth. Workers hauled out 300-pound armchairs Mildred had called French heritage, their absence lightening the air. I stood in the 1,000-square-foot grand hall, blueprints in hand, directing each step like a conductor. The foyer, where I'd once polished floors under Mildred's scrutiny, was stripped to its bones, its marble tiles gleaming with potential sunlight, poured through new skylights, casting patterns that danced like my dreams. Each nail driven, each wall reshaped, felt like a reclamation of my voice, long silenced by those who'd sat in these rooms. On the 10th day, I drafted a press release, my words sharp and clear. A mansion once bound by rigid tradition will become the Haven, a sanctuary for rejected art. I sent it to local papers, art blogs, and collectors, my heart pounding as I hit send. The response was swift, a tide of validation I'd never known. An independent art magazine requested an interview. A Chicago collector offered to fund an exhibit wing. Then an email from the Smithsonian Conservation Center, a place that had rejected me 3 times, proposed a collaboration on my open-access restoration model. I sat in my studio, the 200-square-foot heart of my vision, and let the weight of their recognition settle. The Harringtons had called my art a pastime. Now the world saw it as a movement. As walls rose and rooms took shape, I walked the estate's grounds. The 3-acre expanse no longer a prison, but a canvas. Lindsay joined me one morning carrying coffee, her eyes bright as she surveyed the progress. This could be a real gallery, she said, gesturing to the hall where chandeliers once hung. I nodded, picturing paintings on those walls, each one a story of resilience. Bennett's words echoed. I wasn't just rebuilding a house. The Haven was becoming a testament to what could grow from brokenness. Its foundations laid not in revenge, but in purpose. The estate, once a symbol of my erasure, now stood poised to speak my truth. The gate buzzer pierced the morning stillness, a sharp summons from the world I'd left behind. I glanced at the security monitor, my breath catching at the sight of Brandon Harrington, his overcoat rumpled, standing at the 10-foot-high entrance to my estate. The Haven's construction hummed around me, workers sanding beams in the 1,000-square-foot hall, the air thick with sawdust and promise. I'd built this sanctuary from the ruins of his family's scorn, yet here he was, a ghost of my past, demanding an audience. I spoke into the intercom, my voice calm but unyielding. Let him in, Marcus, but only to the outdoor guest area. He doesn't enter the house. The gate clicked open and I steeled myself for what was to come. On the porch, Brandon's eyes were bloodshot, his hands buried in his pockets. Thanks for seeing me, he said, his voice heavier than I remembered. You have 5 minutes, I replied, arms crossed the winter breeze tugging at my scarf. He swallowed hard. Julie's pregnant. We plan to move back here this spring. This house, it's been in our family for 4 generations. Her child should be born here to carry the tradition. I raised an eyebrow, a laugh escaping me, not cruel but devoid of warmth. You want that child to grow up where Julie mocked my first painting, in the garden where your mother made me pull weeds to prove I was a proper wife. He fell silent, his gaze dropping to the stone path. I pulled the city-stamped Haven plans from my coat. This is a community art center now funded and set to open next month. Your tradition ends here. That afternoon, as I checked the gallery's new lighting system, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Mildred's voice cut through sharp. As ever, I'm requesting a meeting immediately. I smiled faintly. I'm under no obligation to meet you, Mrs. Harrington. Her tone shifted urgency beneath her command. You don't understand the consequences. This family has influence. You won't find peace if you dismantle our legacy. My smile hardened. I'm not dismantling tradition. I'm building a new one rooted in truth, not disdain. I hung up, but the next day she appeared at the gate, her black cashmere coat stark against the iron bars. Marcus stood firm, his voice steady. Miss Abigail doesn't take unscheduled visitors. Mildred glared into the camera, and I watched her on the monitor. The woman who once ruled this house now halted by my key. That evening, another call came, this one trembling. Abigail, I have nowhere else to go, Julie said, her voice cracking. Brandon's cut me off, my mother's been subpoenaed, and I'm about to give birth. I have no home, no money. Memories flooded back her laughter at my art, her smugness at that dinner. Yet her plea was raw for her child. I took a breath, my hands smudged with paint from a restoration sketch. The 400-square-foot guest house behind the garden is empty. I'll reset the code. You can stay until you find another way. A sob broke through the line, and hours later, Julie arrived. Her canvas bag frayed her face, stripped of its former arrogance. Thank you, she whispered, eyes red. I led her to the guest house, its lights warm, and paused. This is for the child who didn't choose this. No one should be defined forever by their mistakes. I turned away, the weight of my choice settling like a quiet tide. When the Harringtons' lawyer emailed offering twice the estate's $2 million value, I replied with one line. I'm not interested in money. I'm interested in purpose. The Haven was my answer, its walls rising as a testament to resilience, not revenge. The Haven glowed against the winter dusk, its 2,000-square-foot gallery, a constellation of golden lights and exposed brick. I stood behind a backstage curtain, my fingers twisting a napkin, the murmur of guests, reporters, collectors, curators swelling like a tide. The opening night was here, and the mansion, once a fortress of Harrington judgment, now echoed with applause for art once cast aside. My heart pounded not from fear, but from the certainty that I had nothing left to lose. The Haven was my voice, and tonight it would sing. At 8 €. A chime signaled my speech. I stepped to the wooden podium, the spotlight warm on my face. Thank you for coming, I began, my voice steady. This place was once filled with silence and whispered scorn. Tonight it belongs to stories real, unapologetic. I signaled and staff unveiled. Reclamation, a 10-foot-wide painting of shattered glass and mirrored shards. A flipped dining table at its heart, reflecting pain, anger, and a woman standing tall, paintbrush in hand. This is dignity, I said. This is me. The room hushed, then erupted in applause, wave after wave. A Boston Review critic requested an interview. A New York collector whispered to Lindsay, "Name the price for the original." The front door opened, and Mildred entered, her back straight, with Brandon and Julie. Her pregnancy now a gentle curve. I thought this was public. Mildred said, her voice cold. "Everyone's welcome," I replied, stepping forward. Even those who called art a cheap pastime. Reporters turned cameras. "You've disgraced our legacy," she snapped. I gestured to the painting. I told the truth of what I lived. This is my voice, and it's being heard. A curator from the New England Museum of Fine Arts stepped forward. "Mrs. Harrington, we're considering this for next year's exhibit, Women and the Voice." Mildred clutched her purse, silent. Julie lowered her head. Brandon retreated. I raised my glass to Lindsay. To the words that broke me now, the foundation of something new. Monday, I was in my second-floor office when Lindsay called, her voice a whisper. Channel 9 now, the TV blared. Harrington Capital under investigation. $10 million missing Mildred. And Brandon faced suspicion for misusing client funds, including leveraging this estate. My early deed filing had saved the Haven from seizure, Gloria confirmed later. "Good thing you acted fast," she said. I exhaled, watching students set up restoration classes in the 1-acre garden. Weeks later, Mildred arrived, cradling a 3-foot by 2-foot portrait of her mother, its colors faded cracks like spider webs. "I forgot it was there," she said quietly. "I wronged you, Abigail. When everything fell apart, Only honesty remained. I traced a crack on the frame. I'll restore it, but it won't be the same. Those cracks make it precious. She looked puzzled. The past needs acknowledgement, then rebuilding with grace, I added. She paused, then said, I'd like to work here, cleaning notes, anything to live better. I handed her a file. Start Monday. You'll train on records, and this painting's restoration begins next week. Be involved. Gratitude flickered in her eyes, a spark where frost once lay. Julie settled into the guest house, enrolling in a 20-hour restoration course. Her son Isaac arrived one afternoon, his blue eyes gentle. Francisco and I worked on Mildred's portrait Sunset, gilding the studio. You've changed this place, he said, brushing away varnish and its people. I smiled, watching apprentices, some from top schools, others dropouts, treat each crack as a memory. In restoration, we learn to reimagine life, I said. Francisco nodded. What was broken becomes more beautiful. In the garden, a spring breeze carried lavender's scent. Julie pushed Isaac's stroller. Mildred jotted notes, and the boy slept dreaming of a world untouched by pain. The haven, once a crucible of pressure, was now a healing canvas, its imperfect lines honest and meaningful. I wasn't just an artist, but a keeper of memories, giving them life in the gentlest way. As I sketched for the spring exhibition, rebuilding from ashes, I knew the cracks in my story had built something stronger, a legacy of light woven from the shards of my past.